use AI to help brainstorm, use it like you would a friend, maybe an English teacher, college counselor, someone who supports you in the process. But really what you're doing when you submit an application, whether it's, an application to university, a scholarship application, it really should be your own work. You want to represent yourself.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Office Hours. I'm Will Geiger, breaking down the latest trends in higher ed and what those trends mean for students and families. Really excited to introduce today's guest, Kevin Mathis. Kevin is the Vice President of Enrollment Management at Bucknell. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks so much, Will. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so I'd love to start things off, Kevin, with a question about your why Bucknell. I know you're a Bucknell grad yourself. You've worked at a couple of other private institutions, and just curious why did you choose Bucknell when you joined as Dean of Admissions in 2017?
So it's a bit of it was a bit of a dream, really. So when I got the job back in 2017, I had a couple of friends reach out to me who I went to Bucknell with, and they said, "Do you remember when you were a junior and told us all you wanted to be dean of admissions at Bucknell one day?" I don't know why I had that thought back when I was here as a student, but in hindsight, I think it has a lot to do with just my thankfulness for the education I received. I think Bucknell's such a amazing institution with the academic opportunities, the personal, and all the growth I experienced that I really thought about professionally. Wouldn't it be great to come back and run the admissions office of the place that gave me so much? So as I was going through my career, I thought about always coming back at some point, and I think a lot of us always hear that phrase. The opportunities come when you don't expect them, or it's maybe not the right time, and it had cropped up, and I actually was originally not thinking of pursuing it, but then a mentor of mine reached out to me and said that they would like to nominate me for the role. They thought I'd be great at it, and that gave me the boost of confidence to say I should at least submit my name and see what happens. But I did want to come back and be at my alma mater. I grew up close to Bucknell, so I'm close to family too. So it was just a really great homecoming for me.
Yeah, no, I love that advice just around sometimes that you don't think the timing is right, and it could be like a really like great opportunity. And I think just for, students and parents out there, just like a mentality to embrace in this process, just because there's a lot of things outside of your control, and you don't know how the chips are always going to fall. But, it's just about I think sometimes like attitude and just having, being able to seize opportunities when you can.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I've been really fascinated with at Bucknell is that you have an official admission statement on AI. Obviously, this is a really big topic in higher ed these days, and just thought it was really, really interesting and bold to put out an admissions statement. So can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Sure. So it's been a number of years now since we've had it up on our website, and I one of the things that I feel really strongly about as a professional in the field is to stay on top of what's happening and what people are talking about. And I remember when AI first kind of really blew up on the scene in terms of students starting to potentially use it. Uh, I took some inspiration from Rick Clark down at Georgia Tech because they had put out something pretty early. And then in the school counseling communities, the college counselors, guidance counselors, school counselors, I feel like there started to be some chatter around, what are colleges doing? How can we advise our students? And that's when I took it to my team and I said, some schools are already putting something out. We're hearing from our partners at secondary schools that they need some help advising their students. How do we want to go about it? So we talked about what kind of statement should we think about putting out? And then we had to get some campus stakeholders involved because as much as the admission process is run by our team. We do work for the larger ecosystem of the university. So it was, looping in with at the time, our vice president of library and IT, because, they're staying on top of all the trends on the technology front, and our provost from an academic standpoint, because we were trying to align ourselves with the university as best we could, and getting everyone's buy-in and kind of creating a statement and saying, this is what we'd like to say. Would the university support it overall? And we did get support from everyone. So that's why we were able to come up with it, and put it on the website to give students some guidance.
Yeah, no, I was really curious just, how kind of what that process looked like. And that makes a lot of sense, just as a reminder for everyone, just to, colleges are, very like multifaceted organizations, and, that makes a ton of sense just to leverage other parts of Bucknell, just so there's some consistency,
Yeah.
across the institution.
Yeah. And I will say from an institutional standpoint, it's interesting because there are lots of faculty from different areas of academia. So you've got the faculty who teach it and lean into it, and that's going to be new parts of the curriculum and things that they're working on. And then you have others where AI is really not something they want because, for example, we have a creative writing major at Bucknell. We want you to be creative and to write. So there's some difference of opinion on term in our faculty and around how much they want students to be able to use it or not. So we were trying to thread the needle as an admissions office of what makes the most sense for us as a university overall, and how do I still represent Bucknell in a way that makes sense without kind of stepping on the toes of what the student experience will be like when they get here.
Yeah, no, I think Bucknell is such a interesting and I think, unique place in that you have engineering, but also liberal arts. And, I could see that like duality and the tension just between, but also probably really interesting just have perspectives from faculty and a diverse, array of disciplines who can kind of provide some perspective on how they're thinking about it. I'm curious, and this is a little fresh off of our, one of the things at Scholarship 360, we help some foundations run scholarship programs. For some of them, we're providing support in the reading process, and it's been interesting over the past couple of years just to sort of see, the I think the impact of AI and the application and essay process for students. And I'm just curious, is this technology causing your team to change the way you read or evaluate applications right now?
It is a little bit. I won't, try to give a non-truth answer. So one of the things that we've done over the last few years is we actually have had some of our team go into different AI platforms and write college essays or supplements for us to just get a sense of what they might look like. And that way, when we go into our reading process, really the distinction we're trying to make is anybody really having AI fully write what they're submitting to us? Because, going back to the statement that we created, we really see it as a support tool, not a do the work for me tool. So what we've always said is, use AI to help brainstorm, use it like you would a friend, maybe an English teacher, college counselor, someone who supports you in the process. But really, what you're doing when you submit an application, whether it's an application to university, a scholarship application, it really should be your own work. You want to represent yourself. So I think when we've done our reader training every year, and every year we're trying to think more and more about it. Um, what what does maybe an AI generated writing sample look like, and how do we maybe identify that in the reading process versus a student still telling their story, still in their voice, writing their own piece. Maybe the AI helped a little bit with spelling and grammar, right? Use it as like a check. And that is not something I'm going to be upset about. So I think for us, it's really about students still continuing to put in the work and tell their story, but using it as a support mechanism rather than, oh, I want to shortcut everything and just get it done and have it do all the work for me. And those do stick out when they happen. You see them occasionally where it's like, this feels and reads like it. Somebody just asked an AI to write something out for them and didn't take the time to do anything with it. And that becomes problematic because, again, when you get to college, faculty expect you to do work. And I've read some articles recently about some schools that are going back to making students write on paper and pen or pencil because they don't want students to be able to use it. Bucknell's not doing that. But the point being, you need to prepare yourself for the college experience and you don't want to create habits that then you can't use and you're then not successful and you're not thriving when you get to college.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really great point. Some institutions that could also be like, an honor code violation or just like, plagiarism, and you can definitely get yourself into a sticky situation. I think just yeah, the point that I think my observation is the essays that are written by AI are just not very good, and they stand out in kind of a negative way, and just I think that is the missed opportunity for students is that doing something that's really authentic, telling interesting stories, making it really personalized to you, like that stands out. And I think probably will be standing out even more as students are, leveraging these types of tools. And, the goal is not to, I think sometimes students think it's like, to write the best essay, and it's a binary like good or bad or some sort of grading scale. And it's more important to be authentic and to tell a good story and to just share something really personal with the with the admissions committee. And that's what's gonna to stand out more, because at the end of the day, you and your team are all human beings. You're not robots who are
Exactly.
who are rating the essays and making decisions. So it just makes sense that a human led essay is going to appeal to humans, not appealing to an algorithm necessarily.
That's something I've started to talk about more openly too with, my colleagues at other colleges and school counselors, is that this is a human process still. And, could we have an AI summarize an essay for us in a sentence or two? Sure. But we're losing the feeling of the application then. And I think that's so important to me as a leader, is to say, we're building an intentional community at Bucknell. And we want students who will come in here and interact with each other and their peers, the staff, the faculty. And I still want us to be reading everything that's written, because I think that human reaction to it is helpful in our review process. And I think when you take that away, I really can't fathom it at the moment. Maybe I will someday in the future, but for right now, I really, really want us to still have that human element of, we're reading it, we're reacting to it, we're summarizing it for the next reader, rather than having some other tool do it for us. I just don't want to go that route.
Yeah, and I think a place like Bucknell, it's a residential, it's a residential human community, and I think that you want to play a role in building the class with
Mhm.
with that in mind. So I think that that makes a ton of sense. I think you called out some really great just I think like tips and advice for how students or parents or counselors can advise students, or students listening to this, how they can think about AI. Really like using it as a tool for brainstorming, and like, here's my essay. Like, what are some sub questions I should be asking myself? Or as like a proofreader, I use that myself as a, it really does a great job of finding typos or just inconsistencies. Really good job these days, and that I think can be a great part of the process for students and parents. To think through. Are there any, I guess, aside from the essay, are there other parts of the process where you see AI being a useful tool for students?
Something that's popping into my head is, I think sometimes students spend a lot of time thinking about the extracurricular section of an application, because you can put the activity title and the hours per week and the weeks per year, but then you just get a little small space to kind of describe it. And sometimes, where I've sometimes used AI personally is how to be a little more concise sometimes,
Yeah, yeah.
because I can be a bit verbose. So I think about that sometimes for students, as they can stress about, oh my gosh, I only have 100 characters, 200. It's not much. And sometimes when you're like, how do I say all of these things? Sometimes, again, as we're talking about brainstorming, how do you brainstorm? This is an activity. These are the things that I want to talk about. This is how I'm thinking about writing it. That can be a good, I think, use of it sometimes, is to help you just understand how to condense it a little bit, so that you're feeling like you're representing everything you want to, without it, going over or getting cut off. I think that's one of the things that I think about.
Yeah, yeah, I still remember. It brings to mind when I was on the school counseling side. So it was my Google Doc with students sending me recommendation or their activities, and like sitting with them in my office is trying to get that like word or character count just a
Yep.
little bit lower, just because
Yep.
yeah, I think that's it's all that is a it's a tricky thing. Just you want to represent your impact and your activities in like just a very clear way. So the admissions officer who is reading a lot of applications can just get a really keen sense of your involvement, your level of involvement and impact. So I think that's a really, yeah, really great way to save yourself some time, to painstakingly go and swapping out words.
Well, and I'd say, Will, the other thing I need to probably make a blanket statement as we're talking, which is, these are the things I think about. But for students out there, it's really important to understand AI policies at all the colleges you're looking at, because some are really strict. So I might be saying something that I'm comfortable with, and you might apply to another school with what I'm saying right now. They might say that's not allowed. So I think that's the other tricky part for students right now to navigate is it's almost like one more thing you need to put on your checklist of as you're looking at colleges, which is, what am I allowed to use it for or not use it for? Because the last thing you want to do is, make an error like that and not be considered or it affect your application negatively when you don't want it to. So I think that's the other important piece. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we all agreed on a same policy?
Yes.
It would be amazing, but I that's probably not going to happen. So I think it's still really important for students to be thinking about each college or university they're applying to and what are the policies? How do I follow the rules to make sure I'm putting my best foot forward?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and I think it's, yeah, a little bit, this is even, I think for something like test optional, like, yeah, those policies, vary from school to school, but it's a little bit of a slower moving thing, whereas, like, this is, like, moving, like, quite quickly. So, yeah, I think a great reminder for students just as they're, doing research, could be something to also a good question to ask if you're on a tour, to ask your, regional local admissions officer, just how that institution is thinking about AI in the process. Well, I'm curious as we're thinking ahead, and I think it's always a interesting part of talking to deans and VPs is just like, part of your job obviously is, you're, focused on the next class and the next class, but then you're also thinking down the road of how like all of this is changing. I'm just curious, Kevin, what parts of the admissions or even financial aid processes do you see AI most dramatically transforming in the next few years, or further down the road if you'd like.
I think there's a lot of us that are waiting. It's happening a little bit now. I think it'll get better over the next couple of years. Is how can AI help us understand transcripts? A lot of us will always say that the transcript is the most important piece of the application process. It's a 3 to 3.5 year record of your academics, rigor, performance, all of those things. But as we were just saying about, AI policies at colleges, high schools, all grade differently, offer different curricula, use different grading scales, and we spend a lot of time on that, and that's okay. It's where we should be spending our time. But as we think about efficiencies that could be created, you know, I do see that as one of the things where when an AI gets really good at being able to extract information to say, what are the grades? Could you recalculate everyone onto like a similar grading scale so that you can have more of an apples to apples comparison? Could it pull out, the trends that you're seeing in terms of the rigor of curriculum based on subject area? These are all things I see as really potential for the future, that will just help move things along. I also just think about it from the standpoint of, if those are the things that can be done faster and we're able to move faster, will students have to wait as long for decisions, right? I mean, right now there's that whole waiting period for regular decision students where you could be waiting months to hear back from colleges because it's the reading, the review process, all the
Mhm.
building. And if you can find that efficiency earlier on, does it allow students to have more time to make final decisions then? In the financial aid space, I'm not sure at the moment. I feel like there's got to be something there with all the data that's gathered on financials, and is there a way that AI could help with that? You know, I'd like to think there is, but I also think that financial is a little bit trickier just because I feel like the money's more personal. So
Mhm.
when I think about, letting an AI into some of that stuff, I think that's something I haven't heard as many people talk about. I think folks are really focused more on like the admissions application and what could be done there.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting about transcripts. I remember, when I started, we recalculated every transcript. I had like an Excel formula on my second computer monitor, and I don't want to like guess how much time I spent doing. And it was honestly like it was a really good exercise, and just really learning a lot about all sorts of different high schools and the way they do things. But it was also a lot of time, and you think that for in admissions, a lot of people get into admissions for you know building relationships with students and sharing more about their institution, not necessarily data entry. So perhaps unlocks like more time and maybe even the need to like the you know what an admissions officer is at some schools. The job description changes a little bit, I think, in a positive way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's interesting. Just the timeline. It's I don't know. I wonder. I know with like rolling decisions and direct admissions and some of these other policies and programs that has been accelerating things. I do wonder just at a lot of schools whether just like there's this like kind of the tradition and ritual of decisions coming out in like mid March and like convening to do admissions committee, if that is something that will be held on to, or something that will be discarded just because you have a competitive edge if you're just like you know getting your decisions out like before December break perhaps.
Right. I think some will, right? I mean, part of again, going back to something I said earlier about it's a human process. I mean, you don't want to strip all the humanity out of an admission process because ultimately, students are sharing themselves with us and they're spending time sharing their stories and their identities and the things that they do. And I think there's an honor to that in terms of like honoring what students have done and the time they're taking and committing to us. So I don't think those things will go away completely, but
Mhm.
I do see that in the future, things could move at a bit of a faster clip. Well, the other thing I was thinking of as you were talking and we are thinking about efficiencies, I also think about a potential barrier reduction for international students because a lot of times colleges will say we need your transcript translated into English for us to
Mhm.
evaluate. And, you look at some of the AIs that are out there and they can translate 40 languages. So you start to think about some of the things where could the process be easier for some students because we don't have to have them take an extra step. You can just submit things in your native language and then we have something that can actually take it and work with it to make it readable to us because I don't speak 40 languages so I can't do
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
But I do think about some of those things too, where there's that piece that, um, it'll remove some of that from the process, as we get more advanced and it gets more incorporated into our processes.
Yeah, no, and you think it's similar for like a teacher recommendation or a counselor recommendation that creates an easier process for translation for international students. I'm curious on that front. I have seen a few tools that have part of their one of their offerings is like helping teachers write recommendations, counselors write recommendations. I'm
Mm,
curious how I know we've talked a lot about the students. I'm just curious how how your team and how you think about that. Because it seems like the policies for students, right? The AI policy, not necessarily for counselors, from being like nitpicky.
yeah, no, you're right. Well, and this is coming up more and more. I feel like in the last 3 weeks, this has come up more and more in conversations I've been part of. I've been doing some conferences and reconnecting with folks, and uh, this one is interesting because I think in a way it comes down to the expectations of the high school
Mhm.
and their values and their core in terms of how they want to represent their students. Because I do think there are schools out there that really believe in, when they have small, I shouldn't say, I think everybody wants to do right by students. The reality is that that looks different at different types of
Sure.
institutions.
Yeah.
So when you think about some smaller high schools that have the ability to get to know their students deeply, I feel like there is more of a pull to say we should be writing everything. We shouldn't do things. I'm not saying that's the right answer. I just feel like that's the ethos I'm getting from some of those places. Whereas I think about schools, that have 1,000 students in their graduating class and the ratios are off the charts and you're trying to support your students as best you can. But, do you have an hour to spend writing on 200 letters of recommendation? Probably not. Um, so I think in a way, it can be a bit of an equalizer to help support students in the best way possible. Now, you know, whether or not folks are using it to write full recommendations, up to them. But I think about a couple of years ago when there's a movement that letters could move to more of a bullet point format. Folks were asking colleges, would you okay if we just did bullet points and really hit the highlights? And a lot of us were saying, that's fine. We just want to know the key information. So I almost feel like this is the next evolution of that, where if a student is if a teacher or counselor has a huge caseload and is looking for some time back to be able to support students and do their job and more, um, am I going to be mad if they're having AI help them? I don't think so. If it's giving me the information I need to really get to know the student and make a good decision on that application, why would I be mad at that? That's I try to be open to those things, um, because ultimately I just want to get to know the student as best I can, through the pieces that we're asking for. So I want to be open minded to what that looks like moving forward. And again, that's why I go back to, you know how does a high school feel about representing their students and their
Yeah.
community, and how do they want to incorporate it into their process? And I think some, you know, it'll be like faculty at colleges. Some will say, no, we're not using it all. And others will say, let's fully embrace it. So I think we as a profession, on the admission side of the house have to just think through, you know, that part of it and not penalize the student for how the school wants to go forward. I think that's my key thing is, I never want to ding a student for decisions that are out of their hands. That's not their decision to make. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
need to accept the information I'm getting, pull out what I need from it, and make a decision on the student, not worry necessarily as much about how I'm getting that information.
Absolutely. And I think, for students and parents out there, there is like such a wide spectrum where, some admissions, officers will be reading an application like where the teacher recommendation, there's like a box and it's like I just don't have time to write a
Yep.
recommendation,
Yep.
all the way to like the place where I was a counselor. I was a counselor. That was my only job. I advised 35 students. I had like all the time in the world to, write, beautiful recommendations, which is great at that school, but there is such a wide gap. And I agree. I think there is like an equity question. I think there's probably some really cool applications where like, I don't know, you five like teachers like just talked about the student like voice
Yeah.
to the school, and then all of that is synthesized into one recommendation. Like I think there's a lot of possibilities just to level the playing field a little bit, and to your point, really getting that key information that I think can just be missing from some students, especially students from underrepresented rural first gen
Yeah.
backgrounds, who are just attending schools where, no fault of the counselor, but they just, they're very, very strapped for bandwidth and have, a ton of other, commitments and obligations and responsibilities. So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
agree.
But yeah, no, that's great. Just that's been more of a conversation, just because I think like that's yeah, just another really like big area where that context can matter a lot, just to sort of understand like, every admissions officer's read a transcript, seen a transcript where, those your grades really dip, and like you don't know what's going on. Like, did the student like they had some sort of, you know, uh thing outside of the control impact that, maybe they just let their grades slip, and having that context is really, really, really important.
It is for sure. Anything like that, it's important to, when there's an anomaly, it's helpful to know what what, if anything, was the reason behind it. Because again, I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier. It's a human process. Me and my team, were people who have lives outside of this work, and we understand life is bigger and things happen.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's I think that's just a great reminder for folks that admissions officers, they're people, and it's not like they're these, just decision makers who are just like, saying like yay or nay to applicants, and loving like all of the decision making. It's a complicated work, and they're human beings as well. As I know, one, I really appreciate you bringing up, Kevin, just the, you know how fragmented higher ed is in a way, where every school is going to be doing things a different way, and students should be checking in on the policies at different colleges they're considering. Are there other ways that students and families can prepare for some of the just kind of the shifting landscape? It seems like there's just so much going on.
How can they prepare? I think just try to stay informed about what's happening, and something simple as, reading emails from colleges. I know some students get a ton of them and families get a lot of them, but I think as things change in the landscape of higher ed in the US, colleges are adapting and making changes that they need to do. And I think a lot of us are trying to communicate when that happens. So if there's going to be something that's different about our process, we're trying to put that out there so that families are aware, whether that's the admissions application or the financial aid applications. Some of the new things around Parent Plus loans and those types of things. we're trying really hard to make sure we're being transparent and upfront about what's going on. But again, like there can be information overload. So I think trying to just digest things as best you can and understand, what opportunities you're going to have and how things might change is important. But the best way to do that is to either be reading yourself or trying to be paying attention to what colleges and universities are putting out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's it's a good reminder. I know, just to echo, I know it's hard. You get a lot of email, a lot of information, but yeah, just trying to, especially with the schools that are on your list, just paying attention to critical information. So yeah, now we get to the lightning round, which is not necessarily a lightning round, just because I'm aware of a lot of these questions. There may be some nuance, and it can be challenging sometimes to and respond in a very like quick way that may not be.
Try my best.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, started off, I'm curious, what's one thing you think that students overthink in the application process?
I think their main essay. I think a lot of students overthink the topic and that it needs to shock us or be the most unique thing we've ever read. Uh, I've read some really, really great essays that students would be surprised that the topic is pretty ordinary. So I think that's the thing. I think there's a lot of pressure around the essay, and they spend too much time thinking about what it should be instead of just being themselves.
I think it's great advice. What do you think's one thing that students underthink?
Supplements. There's a reason we're there. If for those of us that use them, there's a reason we're asking for them. And I think sometimes students spend so much time focused on that big essay, they're not thinking about all the little essays they might have to write for all the colleges they're applying to. And supplements, I think, are where we are looking for that your connection to us. So how is there a match between the two of us? I feel that students who don't spend as much time thinking about that tend to read it a little bit flatter in the process.
Yeah, no, that's a great reminder, and I guess dovetails a little bit with my next question about demonstrated interest. If you can't visit campus, and what are
Yeah,
some
well,
ways to demonstrate interest?
I'll start with the ways that you could always demonstrate interest, over my entire career, which is if there's opportunities to see colleges and universities on the road. So if we're visiting your high school, if there's a presentation in your area, there we try to get to you in a lot of ways. There's also connecting with your admission officer. So if schools publish, that there are admission counselors that serve certain regions, you could reach out to them and ask questions. I will say if you're going to go that route, try not to ask questions that are easily searchable on the website. You always want to go a bit of a level deeper in your conversation. And then I would say post COVID, I think there's been a lot of virtual opportunities. So there are ways that you can connect
Mhm.
and learn about institutions um, through webinars or virtual programming that's offered student to student chats, faculty opportunities. So there's a lot of ways that students can get to know us a little bit better. And again, it's managing time because if you're looking at a lot of schools, it's hard to manage, trying to get to know a lot of people really well. But and then I would say I'll go back to what I said, students don't spend enough time on supplements. I think that's a
Mhm.
great way to demonstrate interest. If you really research a school and write a good supplement, it shows that you're really interested.
Yep. No, I can't. You know, so many essays just when I was at Kenyon, just it could have been written for Kenyon or Middlebury or Amherst or Oberlin and just a bunch of small liberal arts colleges. And if that's the takeaway, that's a mistake. And yeah, piggybacking, I think a great question you can also ask is like, do you consider demonstrated interest? If they don't actually say that, I know sometimes colleges don't, which is just a good thing to be aware of. Um, what on essays, what do you think the biggest mistake that students make when writing and crafting their essays is?
I would say it's that they try to write what they think me and my team want to hear versus what they should actually write about, which is themselves.
Love that. What is we're getting to the end of this, but what is one question that you think every student should ask when they're on a campus tour or visit?
So as a product of a liberal arts education and now being back at my alma mater, I think a great question for students to ask when they're on tour is to ask their tour guide, what has your favorite class been outside of your major, minor, like go outside of what you're specifically studying. What's the favorite class you've taken on campus?
Okay. And last question. What is a question that students or parents should ask, but oftentimes don't, or they don't want to ask it?
Uh, they might want to ask it. I'm just not sure a lot of parents do. I came up with this idea that I think for parents and guardians, they should ask if students are happy.
Okay. Yeah.
I it's something I don't feel like my tour guides ever tell me is a question they get asked. I think they're I think a lot of families ask questions to try to get there about, things that students do, and they're trying to assess fit for their own
Mhm.
student in the process. But, you know, I think about, everybody going through this process, and ultimately I feel like families want their students to be successful, but they also want them to be happy. So I think it's a question of, you know, is this a happy student body? Do you all like being here? I think it's a basic question, but I feel like people don't really ask it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's a hard thing to capture. I guess you could look at maybe like retention, but it's not like there's like this like metric that like there is for like success or success after graduation. And yeah, I don't know. I think there probably is like some, you know, byproduct. If you're happier, you're going to be more successful, and then your peers are going to be more successful and happier just because of how like contagious that is. Awesome. Well, yeah, this has been really great, Kevin. Thank you so much. And just yeah, wanted to if there wanted to check, is there anywhere students can find you, or any recommended resources that they should check out for Bucknell? I know you have a wonderful podcast yourself in the admissions office that we'll definitely plug.
Yeah, the College Admissions Insider is great. Our goal with our podcast is we want to talk broadly about college. So a lot of our episodes are on a topic that is meaningful regardless of where you go. I will say we definitely infuse Bucknell into all those conversations, but it's a great way to think about the college process. If folks want to find me, I'm public on our website, so you can find my email, and I'm on LinkedIn. I don't do a lot of the social media platforms, but I am on LinkedIn if folks want to find me there too.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to join us, Kevin. Really appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of Office Hours with Will Geiger. If you're a student or parent, don't forget to check out app.scholarships360.org, where you can sign up for our free scholarship matching platform. For colleges, we've got solutions to make your work easier, which you can check out at connect.scholarships360.org. And one last thing, if you or someone you know would make a great guest on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can always reach me by email or on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks again for listening.